We're living in a modern, volatile, uncertain, and often chaotic world. So let's find out how our CEOs and our leaders got to where they are today and what CEO activism means to them. Without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome Ben Page, Global CEO of Ipsos. Hello and welcome, Ben. One of the things genuinely that I was thinking about in the taxi on the way over to see you was that when I started Dial and you were a huge supporter and an advisor in the early days 3 years ago, that both you and I have come a huge way in our journey.
Purely by chance in my case, but well done to you, Leila.
Well, far less so than you, Ben, because when I first met you, obviously there was a lot in the media out there. At this point, you'd already made, what was it, GQ's 100 most influential men in Britain and now the world with the global CEO role. But you're working very much around kind of government polling and things like this, and things have expanded out hugely. You've got married again.
I did. Oh, that's true. Gosh, yes, I think things have changed. My wife worked very hard at that, and congratulations to her and myself for making that work. Marriages are a work of art, as you know.
It is. Marriage is a work of art. Marriage is a work of art, and it is, something like any relationship that the more effort that you put into it comes out, branches and flowers and all that other great stuff. But talk to us about what has happened over the last couple of years.
At work or in
At
general?
work, but also personally.
Well, I think, personally,
I know you're
okay.
friends.
So just a little potted history for anybody who, vast majority of people have no idea about me. I joined this company in 1987 as a graduate trainee, and I thought I would stay 2 or 3 years. Obviously, I failed because that was 36 years ago. We did a leverage buyout of the UK entity, Mori, 2000, and I and a management team sold it to a French company called Ipsos in 2005. I was then later the country manager for the UK and Ireland, which is the second largest part of Ipsos, for 12 years. And in 2021, I was appointed as an Englishman as global CEO of a French company, which is in 90 countries, and we're about 19,000 people. So we're a small to mid cap in global capitalist terms, but compared to the 41 people who are in the part of the company that I joined in 1987, it certainly feels different.
I think it's a fantastic journey, and I know you modestly say this is small to mid cap, but ultimately the amount of data and research that you crunch, I mean, essentially it's a global juggernaut, really.
We have plenty of data, yes. I mean, we're in 90 countries. We're gathering data, millions of interviews all the time, satellite photography, drone footage, water samples across India, mobile phone data to measure earthquake recovery. We've won 5 awards from the World Bank for our work on understanding communities that are being impacted by disasters and estimating recovery costs, etc. I mean, we do a huge amount of different things. Down in Australia, we have a Aboriginal and Torres Islander research unit doing work in Aboriginal languages. I mean, in Africa, we're working in conflict zones. So we're all over the world. Obviously, most of our work is in the United States. It's the largest country in our network. But we are literally everywhere. And we're not just about buying CPG, consumer packaged goods or FMCG. We're also about health services, government services, and media, etc. So our strapline is total understanding. We're trying to understand people as humans, not just as consumers, but also as citizens, voters, parents, employees, business professionals, you name it.
Going back on a piece that you mentioned there about understanding as humans and ultimately taking this shift from being very much kind of UK centric and moving into the global landscape now. What have you seen over these last couple of years? Because it has been,
I think it's clearly been eye-opening. And I think one thing that it's a good reminder that if you're in the UK or America listening to this, and it's in English, so you might be, it's very important to remember that the UK-American mindset or outlook on life may not be the same as everywhere else. And I think, I have a Ukrainian refugee living with me in my house in London. But it was very instructive in 2022 when Putin invaded Ukraine, because actually in some parts of the world, rather than the British and the Americans being rather appalled, and most Europeans, they're actually saying, well, what are you bothering about? You invaded Iraq. Why isn't this just Putin doing the same sort of thing? And there's large parts of the world, in Africa, in Asia, where the view is very, very different. And it's the same when we come to equality. Again, we in Britain and America have a sort of broadly shared outlook on things like, racism, for example. But that gets very complicated as you start to go around the world. I mean, what's racism in Africa? What's racism in China? They don't, in fact, the only thing that seems to unite the world is the ability to sort of perhaps talk about gender bias. Everything else is a bit more negotiable and a bit more contextual.
It's a really good point that you make there. It's local, it's global, and it's local. And what is something to one community in a certain part of the world could be entirely different somewhere else, and legally so.
Yes, well, that's true. I mean, it's illegal, on sexuality. I mean, so in my lifetime in Britain, we've moved from homosexuality being illegal to 2 out of 3 people saying it would be absolutely fine if Prince Harry had married a man rather than Meghan Markle. I sort of suspect Meghan Markle might have been happier, but anyway. But of course, in other countries it remains illegal. I mean, even being an atheist is illegal in some countries. And so, how you navigate that as a global organisation, and what your bottom line is, and my point on business culture is that your culture is the worst thing you will tolerate. That's what your culture actually is. And that makes it pretty tough, actually. But I think as a French company, and we are a proud French company, despite me being English, we do believe in the values of the Enlightenment. So we believe in data, we believe in empiricism, we believe in equality, fraternity, and liberty. But how that plays out if you're running a global business is trying to follow the law in all the countries you operate in to be legal. Which is generally a condition of operating in a country, does mean that, you certainly get a different perspective than if you were just spending all your time in New York or London.
Have you found that you've needed to adopt or change your leadership style as you've become more broad? And I know that you spend a lot of time over in Asia now. Every time I see LinkedIn, you're in a different country or doing the B sign as you were in Korea the other week. Have you had to change that?
I think the basic principles about who you are and what you stand for, of course, don't change. But the way I describe leadership is that you start off in a small team, and it's like you're painting miniatures, and you can, what everybody in your team is doing. And as your canvas gets larger and you become responsible for more people, you have to start painting in bigger. Your brushes get bigger and bigger. And now the only messages I can transmit are sort of on the side, 50-foot high letters, because that's the only way something is really going to get through. So you move to some more overarching principles, but the principles don't change. But I think you have to. The one thing I'm very struck with is, if even when I was just in charge of the UK, which is only 2,000 people, it would still take me months and months to get a message across. And now at a global level, I must assume that it's going to take, years probably to really change cultures. Is not something you can do overnight. So your paintbrushes get bigger and bigger.
And what you're saying essentially is the nucleus of your personal values and beliefs haven't changed, and that is the same for the company, but ultimately they're nuanced as the brush strokes get larger.
Yes. I mean, we fit into the local, one of the points about one of the differences with us, remember, we're a research organisation. We have to be able to speak to everybody, whether that's in China or India or New York. And that means the ability to speak to very rich people, very poor people, very autocratic people, very libertarian people. and you're trying to be, in some senses, as neutral as possible, because, of course, you don't want to lead your respondents. You're trying to get everybody to feel comfortable. So it means you have to be a little bit adaptive, I suppose, is one we're saying. But there are some basic principles in terms of how we operate as a business that obviously we wouldn't compromise.
And obviously, this is the CEO Activist podcast. We were fortunate that we got to see you at number 10 Downing Street around our new campaign, which is all around CEO activism, putting the S in ESG and why diversity ought to potentially be used as a commercial lever.
Well, it is. No, I think the evidence on
prosperity.
I mean, the evidence on diversity, I think, is absolutely overwhelming in terms of a lack of diversity can actually be, in some contexts, life-threatening. And you see that after 9/11, when it turns out that the CIA has nobody who actually either speaks the relevant Arabic or really understands various aspects of Muslim or Islamic, sometimes perverted Islamic ideology. And so they're just flying blind because they lacked that diversity, even though they were all very clever. And I've seen that in my own business, where we're conducting a global survey trying to measure everything that matters to humanity. And we had somebody who was half Jamaican, half English. We had somebody who was Chilean, but we probably should have had more Indians and Chinese on the team. And when you look at, you suddenly realize, well, why didn't we ask any questions about that? It's just because we hadn't thought about it. We were just blind to it. So, it's all of the evidence on diversity is clear that you're more likely to produce creative and innovative ideas and products if you have a more diverse group of people. And actually, my business is about, if you don't have that inside your business, my business can bring that to you to help you to fill in the gaps, in a sense. That's part of being able to reach people all over the world in all sorts of societies and to bring all of that together, because otherwise you're going to just not understand the world. And as the world becomes more diverse, as the world becomes more complex and interconnected, diversity in organisations actually also becomes more important. I mean, you see it even in running hospitals in Britain, that if you don't understand that, the worst hospitals to run in Britain are the ones serving the most diverse group of patients. And the reason for that is that people, healthcare is a very intimate and personal thing. And people's culture, background, ethnicity makes radical differences to their level of expectation or how they want to be treated. And so if you're not culturally competent, you will have trouble. And so, you need to be able to deal with the complexity of the world. And that means building diversity into your decision-making and into your businesses.
Have you ever had any faux pas?
Millions.
To cultural competence? Because...
Oh, yes. Very simple one. You have a group of visitors from the Middle East. And of course, I'm greeting everybody and I try and shake the woman's hand. Utterly the wrong thing to do, because they don't shake. Of course, you're not meant to shake a woman's hand. That would be utterly inappropriate in that culture. But I was just being what we do in London. We shake people's hands when we meet them. So there's a very obvious one.
It's so fascinating, culture, because it lives, breathes and sleeps through everything that we do, everything we touch, everything we feel. My late father, I remember, used to tell me a lot of stories about his time in Hong Kong. And I remember he once said that there was an Australian who, to his boss, Mr. Mock, threw a business card across the table.
Oh, dear.
And it was an absolute no-no. He wouldn't do business with him, because the way that you would do things out there is
disrespect.
Present the business card facing the individual. And that's how things...
I got out of a cab in Tokyo recently, and the taxi driver got out of the taxi, opened the door and bowed to me. And I was just sort of, oh my God. I mean, but this is probably how things he was probably doing. I'm not sure they didn't all do that, but presumably some of them, a lot more of them used to. How charming, how lovely. But
so lovely. Did you start bowing at everyone?
Well, no, I don't know who to bow to. I need more instruction. Shinichi, if you're listening, we're going to have to go out in Tokyo again soon.
And what about CEO activism itself? And again, I don't want this to sound
I think the point about the CEO Activist Council, and I think the good thing about it is that these things organisations take their cues from the top. The fish rots from the head down. If diversity is a sort of tick box exercise you've done because ESG is all the rage and therefore you need to put something in your annual report, quite frankly, you are going to have a problem sooner rather than later. And so I think basically, I mean, my pay is actually linked to our gender balance and to our carbon footprint. So I'm financially motivated as well as morally motivated to do the right thing. But frankly, even if my pay wasn't, I would be making a difference. And so, the CEO ultimately is making decisions around payroll, around who gets promoted, who gets fired, is setting the culture and the tone for the organization. And that's why it matters. And if you try and delegate all that to somebody else or think it's something that HR will do, again, you'll have much less impact.
You make some really valuable points, and I love how direct you are when we have these conversations, because I think it's really, it's really easy to talk about the great, exciting things that are going to happen, and for, I think at times people think that the role of a CEO is kind of a walk in the park, because there's
well, wow. If I think, to be honest, what I've learned as a relatively new CEO of a moderately sized company globally is that I mean, my pay is the worst in the French stock exchange, but and there are reasons for that, which are about our culture. Actually, we don't believe that business is all about a few people who should earn millions and everybody else shouldn't. But I think actually I would say that many of the CEOs I know, they really earn their money, because it is a job that is all consuming. And I think what many people forget, particularly for listed businesses, is that you don't, before, when I was running a country, I was very concerned about obviously our customers, and I was very concerned about our staff, and a little bit concerned about our media profile and all of that. Now I'm concerned about all of those things, but I'm also now very concerned about the stock market and our investors and their interests, and indeed my main board, and their interests are not always the same as those of the staff or even the clients.
It's a peculiar virtuous cycle, isn't it? Having spoken and interviewed a lot of leaders, is each time they go up and think, oh, actually, I'll kind of sort this out, something else appears. And, more so of late, it's actually the level of education of all of the different stakeholders that they need to try and please for the right reason.
They have different. Yes, I don't know about educating investors, but
educated investors
yes.
are more.
They just want money. I mean, some of them care about ESG, but they care about money even more.
I don't know.
Really? Okay.
I will positively challenge you on it. I do think
really
people care more about where they put their money.
Oh no,
and I know that
consumers and the public as a whole. But if you're a fund manager and your bonus or large bonus is dependent on the performance of the equities that you've decided or your investments, you become extremely interested in the performance of those investments.
But think of all of the funds that are now saying, hey, these organisations that we're going to put our money into, it's got to be purpose-driven pounds. They're businesses that are helping society.
I think that's true, but I think there are still look at America, where there is a sort of reaction against ethical investment, for example. So I don't.
Take on this. I'd love to know your thoughts, because and it's about how ESG and diversity, inclusion, belonging, equity, culture. You said at the beginning of this chat that. Is that kind of, we didn't say is it a buzzword, but ultimately I think there are people questioning whether this is just another form of CSR, and Larry Fink hadn't mentioned it as much in his chairman's piece.
Okay.
But I honestly think the statistics say it's happening. I mean, look at frameworks like the wealth economy, where they're talking about capital being beyond just.
I mean, I think
fiscal.
I think people have
human capital.
Obviously. Climate change, sustainability, and in its broader sense, and inequality are actually all ultimately threats to the existence of business. If you have too much inequality in a society, you basically get violence, and that a society where trust is broken down and is violent is quite a difficult place to run a business. If it's too hot to actually make any products because the climate change is now out of control, again, you're going to have trouble running a business. So all of those things matter, and they have more and more prominence, and businesses to a certain extent are made up of people who are from society. So human beings as a whole are more concerned about all of those things, And we are in a limit, the 2020s are a liminal period where, in a sense, we are shifting from the neoliberalism of the post Cold War period, and from around 1990 onwards, to some new normal. The challenge is that we don't know what the new normal is. But I think, what I was going to say, Leila, is that I think regardless of your position on climate change, and I think it's in present danger, and we have to do something. But businesses that have a purpose, absolutely, I believe, and a clear purpose that their people can buy into, absolutely outperform those that are just about making money. Absolutely, I have no doubt about that. If human beings want to be part of something that is bigger than just themselves, and so telling them it's great, we've made lots more money, isn't very motivating unless it's a small partnership and you're all equally sharing it. But if I tell all my people, oh great, our profits are up massively, I mean, they're most of them are not shareholders, so they're not going to see an immediate benefit. They might like to know that the company is secure and their jobs are secure, but they want to know that actually we're doing something that makes a difference, that helps people make better decisions. Or in the case of COVID-19, where we were tracking the progress of the disease by monitoring random samples of the population, they know that data is actually going to make decisions that are effectively life or death decisions ultimately. So I think purpose matters. ESG, yes, I believe in social progress. The joke I always make is that I've stayed in this company so long that I can change it into the way I wanted it to be when I was 22, which was very different from how it was. It was a nightmare, so I've stayed here long enough to fire everybody who made me miserable. The only thing I'd point out, of course, is that the average 22-year-old joining now probably has different ideas than what I, as a 58-year-old, think it should be like. And we'll have to have some sort of conversation.
I do love that story, though, because you told me that, I remember, literally when I must have first interviewed you probably 3 years ago. And you've been famously, recently quoted as saying that we need to stop talking about change. Talk to me about change, because...
Okay. Well, in the marketing and advertising industries, I think there's a obsession with shiny new toys, So this year it's all about AI, which is what it was down at the Cannes Lions Marketing Festival recently. A few years ago, it was big data, et cetera, et cetera. What I'm on change is just trying to point out is that there are functions. If you think about people and how they work, we measure a number of different things. So there are your opinions. So what you thought about, I don't know, Black Mirror last night, or the last episode of Love Island, or even a speech Rishi Sunak gave as Prime Minister of the UK. That might, those are sort of opinions. They bounce. It's a bit frothy. It's like the top of the sea. Then underneath that, there are attitudes, and those change a bit more slowly. They're perhaps more like the tide rather than the froth on the top of the wave. And they, what's your attitude to the government of the day or something? Well, you might think they're good, you might think they're bad. And then underneath that, and this is the really key point, you have values. Now, these are like the deep, deep currents in the sea, the one that goes from the Sargasso Sea and takes warm water around the top of Britain and Europe. Those don't change very, very quickly. So, attitudes to homosexuality in Britain have changed dramatically in my lifetime. Attitudes to pornography and taking drugs have changed dramatically in my lifetime. And those things do change, but they don't change on an annual basis. And I think sometimes in marketing, everybody's so looking around, the next thing it'll all be virtual reality. Well, a few years ago, it was virtual reality. Now it's AI, next year it'll be something else. And we should just look at those things in politics. One of the things about British politics, you can say it's terribly turbulent and fractious. But interestingly, in Britain, partly because of the way the system works, no party ever gets less than the two main parties ever gets less than 29% of the vote, because they've got core voters who just don't shift. I mean, I could put a parrot on a stick and call it a Labour Keir Starmer, or call it Rishi Sunak, and it would get about 29% of the vote. I mean, I thought Jeremy Corbyn would break this rule in 2017 when he went into an election against Mrs May at only 26%. And I was figuring, a left-wing Labour Party meets a centre-right Conservative Party, and what's going to happen? But blow me down, he did much better than 29%. So and Rishi Sunak, he's well below 29% at the moment, but I will bet you a large amount of money, 10 grand, there you go, Leila, if you want to make a bet, that he will end up, despite all his problems, with more, with 29% at least of the vote. Because there's just it's like trust in government. We all say trust is in terminal decline and it's a crisis of trust. I can find you innumerable newspaper articles telling you that. And yet, if you look at trust in government in the United States, despite Donald Trump's hard work, trust in the federal government between 2011 and 2019 didn't change at all. It's much lower than it was in the 1950s, but it's not many of the things that we're worried about. Privacy. Again, concern about privacy is the same as it was in the 1990s. We just weren't paying much attention to it in the 1990s because it was before the internet and social media. Now we're interested in it. And so we get obsessed about, we have sort of attention bias. We focus on new shiny things, or we spot patterns that as human beings, we love making up patterns. And sometimes they're just wrong. So things change less than you think, maybe.
It is fascinating. I think, look, last couple of years, it's been, we're kind of, in an economic crisis, quote unquote, right now. We've had COVID, we've had the pandemic, we have had, a lot of changes in our government and, what they sometimes call the government in waiting. How do you as a CEO cope with that change? Because there is, some is moving slower. Yes, absolutely. However, there's the dealing with a huge amount of, kind of internal change and then also what's happening in our external environment as well.
Well, we're obviously a business that measures and responds to change and understanding what's going on in human societies. But I think, at the same time, we're re-engineering our business. I've got 190 people working flat out on generative AI who who weren't doing that a year ago. I wasn't even thinking about generative AI in that way. We were using algorithms and machine learning, but we obviously didn't have the large language models that we're now testing for some of the biggest tech companies on the planet. So we're able to, I think it's about being responsive, being sensing, in a sense, would be the word I would use. So you can think about scenarios. So what would happen if, I don't know, our friends at Google, who are one of my biggest clients, decided to go into the market research business? Fortunately, they tried Google surveys which they launched in 2012, and they've just discontinued it. So they obviously decided not to do market research at the moment, which is good. They're also a major client. But what happens if something like that happens? How are we going to respond? And I think the point is to build in that sort of that agility, that sensing and awareness of what's happening, early signal detection into the organization so that you're ready and you've perhaps built some scenarios, built some redundancy and resilience in.
Transformation and change seems to be every other word from leaders I'm speaking to these days. And, wonder on a really personal note, if I may ask, because I find the longer I'm in business at times, the lonelier I get. And I hate to say it, but the older you get, the more you realise that actually...
Well, statistically, as the older you get, the more time you will spend alone. If you look at the charts on how much... you've got young kids, so you're going to be spending plenty of time with your children. But overall, the older you get, the more time you spend alone. So you should get comfortable being alone.
How do you deal with that, though?
Because being alone, or...
Not just with being alone, but the drive and resilience that's needed to be a CEO... But then also, when you started at Ipsos, it was a really different world. Not everything was on social media.
Didn't exist. The internet didn't exist.
Our younger generations were kind of less verbal about what they thought about leaders. It's like almost nowhere to hide in the modern world.
Yes.
And leaders are dealing with more and more challenges.
I think my personal, everybody does it in a slightly different way, but my personal thing is that you build a framework and communications are hugely important, and people can spot a fake, miles off. So you've got to build in your routines of communication because, you're the leader of a large organization. People want leadership. That means they want clarity, they want fairness, they want transparency, they want to believe that someone has a plan. Even if the world is in turmoil and chaos, they want to believe that someone has a plan. So one of the reasons why conspiracy theories thrive during pandemics and crises, because some people don't want to believe that a small virus can appear and completely change the world. That is too upsetting and frightening. It's much better to believe that it's a plot by Bill Gates or somebody else. And then at least psychologically, okay, so the world does have order. It may not be an order I like, but there is order. There is somebody's in charge. Somebody knows what's going on. So the job of the leader is to tell that story. But I think as a human being, you've got to make downtime for yourself. And one of the things that younger people, I think, one of the things you learn as you do these jobs for longer is the need to make sure that you feed yourself properly, that you're sleeping, that you take advantage of moments of quiet to have some reflection or meditation or whatever it helps you recharge your batteries. Because if you try and work at 110% for 15, 18 hours a day, you can do it, but you can't do it for very long. And these jobs ultimately, particularly when you're trying to change large organizations, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
How do you stop the role becoming completely and utterly all-consuming? Because there's something I've been debating a lot with myself of late.
I think it's harder when you're a young small entrepreneur, to be honest, because so much depends on you and everything. It revolves around you and yourself.
The principles are the same, i.e. there are challenges that you might have in terms of, delivering good news I find far easier, but delivering challenging news in kind of, difficult times and such. But then also this growing number of stakeholders that you have to manage.
Well, I think you have to make time, build in the most effective leaders, build time for the communications with the different groups of stakeholders, and they manage those stakeholder relationships carefully. And the more senior you get, the more that, unfortunately, in some ways, the more time you have to spend on the stakeholders, which may not always be your direct clients. But I think it's just about you have to sort of compartmentalize and make time. And you also have to be slightly philosophical. There is a huge amount of luck in careers. We we write books about the people who are successful, but we don't write the books about the people who did exactly the same thing and weren't successful. I mean, I'm I'm reasonably good at my job, and I got the job after various decisions and changes, etc., by the board. And others, so I had to be capable of doing the job and able to take advantage of the opportunity. But there's still luck and timing, and so often in so many people's careers, and being philosophical about that, and remembering that everybody gets up in the morning and puts on trousers or clothes, and everybody. Sorry, well, I don't know. It's not very sophisticated philosophy, but it's just just remembering all of that. And at the end of the day, I always say to people, what are they going to put on our gravestones? We worked hard at this business. Well, great. Great. I mean, fantastic, lovely.
So 2 questions then.
Yeah.
What would they put on your gravestone?
Oh, God knows.
And whilst you're thinking about that one, is there anything that you would have done differently?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, I would have learned to be much more focused. I wasted about 5 years of my career, such as it is, by not being completely focused on what good looks like and being resentful about what was needed, to be honest. And it was only when I decided I better be really good at this that, hey, strangely, I was really good at this. But not everybody in business, not all my 19,000 people want to do the things that are necessary in order to, be in charge of a department or a country or a global business. Because actually they want a life. And if you can have a life, but it won't be, your life as a CEO isn't quite the same as somebody who does a 9 to 5 and goes home and doesn't worry about things, because you are going to worry about things. You just have to, enjoy it. There's a film I enjoyed is a Japanese movie called Jiro Dreams of Sushi, which is about the man called Jiro, who, he may still be alive, runs the only 3-star sushi bar in the world in a Tokyo Underground station. And he says, he dreams, of course, about making the perfect sushi, which on the face of it is perfectly simple, but of course turns out to be, he says it's like a mountain, you never get to the top. And that's hence the name of the movie, Jiro Dreams of Sushi. And he says you have to fall in love with your work. And if you can fall in love with your work, then thinking about it a lot of your time, but hopefully not every second of your time, helps.
Recently I read a book, and it was by Viktor E. Frankl, which you probably have read, knowing you. And it's called Man's Search for Meaning.
Yeah.
What you're talking about there, which is, it's like sushi. Is there in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is there a piece of sushi at the top, which is self-actualization?
Yeah.
Possibly not. this book by Viktor E. Frankl, it talks about a theory called logotherapy, and it's all about how, even in the most traumatic of times, there is learning from those times and good in all of those times, but you never actually reach this place of self-actualization. And if you were to, it almost is, it's like...
There's a great quote on this one, which is, never give anybody everything they want. And one of the examples used in relation to that was Anthony Bourdain, the famous chef, man who wrote about being a chef and then ultimately ended up killing himself because he had everything he wanted. So yes, you need to be careful of giving somebody everything they want. It doesn't, and of course, stuff doesn't make you happy.
Don't worry about that, though.
Well, I don't. I've still. I mean, as
driven CEOs, there's always the next thing. There's always the next thing.
No, I'm just trying to build an organisation that defaults to doing great work. And if I can, people say this stuff, but I genuinely believe it. I want to make it so I can stop work at some point in my 60s. I'm 58, and it will be
not long to go.
Well, it's not. It isn't long, really. And the organisation will be brilliant, and it doesn't. Where I don't need to be chasing it over X, Y, or Z every day. That's what you want to get to. That's what I tried to do in my last job. You want to build the organisation so that it defaults to doing the right thing without intervention.
And the bigger purpose of the business and the mission is ultimately bigger than you as the CEO. Have you found that your personal life has ever had a huge impact on your business life and the decisions that you've made as a CEO?
No. To be quite honest, I am
even when, say, and forgive me for asking the question and interrupting there. I was getting quite excited, but when you lost your parents, and
so they both died in the last 8 years, and I think the message to everybody is, if your parents are still alive and sane, go and film them immediately, talking about a photo album of the photo, because otherwise, when they're gone, you won't know who's in the photo album of those old black and white photos, and there is never a right time to have that conversation. So I do think, in my personal view, you become an adult when you bury your parents, and actually. I thought when I had kids where I had Horace, hello Horace, that makes me an adult. But actually, I think it's when you bury your parents, then you're on your own. You're next, and that gives you a sort of sense of perspective. Life changes, but I think in terms of work, you just have to carry. Well, you can go off and lose yourself in grief, and different people respond to grief in different ways. I just get the job done, and I'm afraid, and this is I think this is the point, and I'm lucky as a man that I haven't had to make choices about am I going to look after my child, because my first wife did that. In fact, she doesn't she hasn't worked in a job since 1994. That's not her thing. She likes the looking after doing, I don't know, she doesn't work anywhere anymore. Horace is 28, so I'm not quite sure what she does now, but either way, I have been focused on work, and I was successful when I was focused on work. And if you tell me that you're somebody who can leave work every day at 5 p.m. And go home and spend lots of time on domestic stuff, and you do all of that, and you become, brilliantly successful, then I would just say you are a far, far better person than I am, because I've found that you have to be successful, you have to be pretty focused. And things aren't just given out easily. That's a set of compromises that a lot of people don't want to make. I've got people who work for me who went to the finest schools, the most expensive schools, the most expensive and finest universities, and they will never be in charge of as much as a sweet shop, because actually they don't really want to be.
So fascinating. We could easily do another whole podcast about drive, individual drive and motivation, and what that means.
Turning up, there's a lot to be said for turning up on time and for enthusiasm and consistency and doing what you say you will.
Absolutely, it's lots.
And we make a lot of excuses, but I think it's easier for me to say that, well educated. Most my father ever earned was £19,000 a year, but I had the advantage of his amazing brain and being encouraged to read from the age of 5 or something. God knows what. But no, I think that there's a lot, personality really matters in business, and how one applies oneself really matters. But also, of course, how you get on with others and how you understand others. And when you're young and starting out, just drive on its own may be enough. But as things get bigger and more complicated, your ability, and we're coming back to diversity here, to get on with different sorts of people, to work with diverse teams of people who have different expectations. And, working with the Japanese is completely different than working with the Americans. And being able to do that and understand the differences at a global level becomes more and more important. So you're learning new things all the time.